I just posted a video critiquing John Weiss and Sean McDowell when they were talking about progressive Christianity. And John Weiss defined progressive Christianity as uh, people who compromise the gospel, the Christian message in some way to conform it to culture. While I was making the video, I was thinking about this great irony, and I thought the video was already getting long. I didn't want to address that great irony in that video because then it would just become another thing. So instead of making a follow-up video, I've linked the previous video I made critiquing McDowell and John Wise below, so you can watch that if you haven't. But here I want to address this, that by that definition, evangelicals are the biggest progressive Christians. In other words, if the criterion for being a progressive Christian is to compromise and distort the gospel based upon influence and popular ideas in general secular culture, then I would submit there's nobody that has compromised the gospel and is a greater progressive Christian than the very evangelical Christians who rail against progressive Christianity. How's that for an irony? But today, evangelicals have so distorted the Christian gospel that it is all but unrecognizable in their movement. Now, for 40 plus years, 45 years, evangelicals have had a cultural compromise with the Republican Party and have become captured to narrow partisan political viewpoints so that everything that is Republican is Christian and they're just melded into one another. Along the way, then they've melded Christian discipleship with nationalism, with often approval of foreign wars that have had devastating impacts on local populations, with gun culture, identifying freedom as the freedom to kill your neighbor with your gun, uh, dehumanizing rhetoric about the poor and the marginalized as lazy. And under Donald Trump, in the last 10 years, that impact on evangelicalism has only been magnified. Here you have millions of professing evangelical Christians who view a sexual abuser, misogynist, racist, felonious huckster as God's chosen vessel. Some of them kind of try to rationalize it by saying, well, he's like a King Cyrus. Others say, no, he is God's favored son. And you get this sort of new apostolic baptism of him in this quasi-cultic framework. Either way, it is distorting the impact and message of the Christian gospel. And so you see this fight in fear, anger, and hostility toward migrants and refugees. I repeatedly see conservative evangelicals maligning renewable energy and concern for the environment, turning a blind eye to overt government corruption and the rise of an anti-democratic hypocrisy run by billionaires who are exploiting the poor. Even now, Donald Trump and Elon Musk are sabotaging Social Security by shutting down offices and reducing services. And this is only going to magnify the impact on the people on the very margins of society. And I want to just show a clip for you to drive home exactly what I'm talking about. This clip comes from Howard Lutnick, who is Donald Trump's Secretary of Commerce. And just yesterday, he was talking about Social Security. And this, what he has to say here is extraordinary and chilling. So let's take a look.
Let's say Social Security didn't send out their checks this month. My mother-in-law, who's 94, she wouldn't call and complain. She just wouldn't. She'd think something got messed up, and she'll get it next month.
Yeah.
A fraudster always makes the loudest noise, screaming, yelling, and complaining.
Howard Lutnick, Wall Street titan, Trump cabinet member, saying that his mother-in-law wouldn't call and complain. She'd just wait until next month, see if her check came then. Anybody complaining about not getting a check is obviously a criminal.
And see how insane this is? This is the Trump administration. The millionaire's mother-in-law wouldn't complain if her Social Security check that she depends on, or maybe she doesn't depend on, if her Social Security check doesn't come, well, her son-in-law is a millionaire, right? Um, and that's the way that you're going to root out corruption. Why is Howard Lutnick having this kind of conversation about suddenly withholding checks from people as a means of deciding who's corrupt? So that the old lady who's gonna get kicked out of her house because she can't now pay her rent because her social security check didn't come, if she calls about it, where's my check? She's corrupt. That's the message he wants us to believe. This is the Trump administration. This is what they're doing to the poor, to the marginalized, to the widow. I cannot imagine something more antichrist than this. And evangelicals are silent. You want to talk, as John Wise does in the previous video, about how progressive Christians are compromising the gospel because they're accepting neo-Darwinian evolution as the natural scientific account of the origin of diversity of species on Earth. So they've compromised. And yet you don't think it's a compromise to support a man who is attempting to undermine social security. That is the degree of hypocrisy, the lack of self-awareness that is mainstream in the conservative evangelical American church today. And that just illustrates why, by the very definitions that Sean McDowell and John White are using in their exchange, evangelical Christians are the biggest progressive Christians of them all.